The stars didn't blink. Not out here. Out here, far from any sun or moon, space was quiet in the kind of way that made your bones forget what warmth ever felt like. Nothing moved. Nothing whispered. Nothing lived. Until it did. The ship came out of the dark without warning. No signal, no transponder, not even a ripple in the void to say we're here. It just appeared. 1 second there was nothing, and the next, there it was. Massive. Angular. Wrong. It floated like a scar carved into the stars. A deep, cruel thing that didn't belong to the cold silence of this stretch of space, but to war. You could feel it. Even if you were sitting in a command room hundreds of kilometers away, you could feel it. The hair on your arms lifted. Your throat dried up. Every human instinct screamed the same thing. That's one of ours. But there hadn't been a human warship out here for over 60 years. Not since the ceasefire. Not since the silence. Everyone remembered the silence. When the war ended, the terms were clear. The Galactic Accord didn't trust us. Too aggressive, they said. Too unpredictable. Too dangerous. So we were given borders, tight ones. Monitored ones. Human fleets were stripped down. Weapons dismantled. Our warships were locked away in sealed stations or in some cases, broken apart and scattered into pieces no one could reassemble. That was the agreement. That was the peace. And now, this. The warship drifted like it remembered none of those promises. Its hull still wore the blackened scars of battles fought long ago, but it was alive, powered, online, moving under its own systems. There were no escort ships. No declaration. Just the silent return of something humanity swore it would never use again. And the aliens were watching. They always were. Are you getting this? The voice cracked over the internal comms, tense and raw. On the bridge of Relay Station Delta 5, a handful of operators stood frozen, staring at the long-range scans that shimmered on their holoscreens. Confirming now, another voice said quieter. Running IDENT scan. Power signature matches, old human tech. Very old. No known registry. It's not one of ours. Not anymore. But it was, someone whispered. Look at the silhouette. That's a Juno-class dreadnought. Everyone turned. No one said a word. The Juno-class hadn't flown since the Battle of Minera. That had been the last true human push before the treaties were signed. Before we were invited to sit down and shut up. And now one was here again, floating right up to the edge of the Accord's neutral zone, like it belonged. What's it doing? The first voice asked. Nothing. It's just, sitting there. The warship didn't move. Didn't speak. But its mere presence was louder than any signal they'd ever received. And in the far reaches of the galaxy, others were hearing it too. Aliens. Colonies. Military outposts. Even pirates. Everyone. The silence was broken. In the capital chamber of the Varelian Council, the tension was thick enough to crush a planet. The Chancellor leaned forward on his many limbs, voice smooth but sharp. Have the humans explained themselves? They claim no knowledge, a reply came. Earth Command disavows any connection to the vessel. They say it is impossible. That it cannot be real. Yet it is, the Chancellor hissed. We see it. We hear the echo of its engines. It exists. Murmurs rippled across the chamber. Old fears stirred like ghosts. They swore off war, someone muttered. They swore they were done with violence. The Chancellor didn't blink. They lied. Back on Earth, things weren't any clearer. In a subterranean room beneath the old Continental Complex, 6 humans sat around a table. Generals, scientists, analysts. No cameras. No recordings. Just tension and an old unease nobody wanted to name. How can we lose track of a Juno class? Someone demanded, pounding the table. Those ships weren't just decommissioned, they were entombed. Buried. We burned the blueprints. We didn't lose track, a quiet voice said from the end of the room. That one was never on the list. Silence followed. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a ship out there that never should have existed. A ghost. A mistake. Maybe something someone built in secret, deep underground. Maybe something we forgot. Or maybe, the voice paused, it's something we weren't supposed to remember. Ridiculous, another man snapped. We kept records of everything. We accounted for every unit, every prototype, every engineer. Not every engineer, the quiet voice replied. Not all of them stayed loyal when the ceasefire was signed. Nobody spoke after that. The truth was, everyone had always known the silence wouldn't last forever. It wasn't real peace. It was a cage. The humans were told to stay quiet, to stay still, to not be themselves. And for a while they did. They rebuilt. They stayed out of fights. They followed the rules. But underneath, the ember never went out. Humanity was never just about survival. It was about fire. About pushing back. About never, ever kneeling. So when the warship broke the silence, it wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was a statement. And everyone heard it. On a mining moon 2 systems away, a teenage girl looked up from her rusted console and saw the alert flash red. Her hands trembled. She wasn't a soldier. She barely knew what half the words meant. But she knew the shape of the thing on her screen. She'd seen it in her father's old stories. She whispered to herself, voice shaking, "That's a human dreadnought." Beside her, an old man closed his eyes and nodded slowly. They were never meant to be forgotten. Across space things shifted. Ships moved. Codes were set. Sleeper agents awoke. Old fears walked again. No one knew what the warship wanted. It made no threats. It issued no commands. It didn't fire. But it also didn't leave. It waited. Hung in the dark. And the longer it waited, the more the tension grew. On board the ghost ship itself, no signals came in. None went out. The bridge was dark. Empty. Silent. Except for one sound. Breathing. A figure stood near the command deck. Human. Dressed in worn armor older than any living soldier had ever worn. Their eyes were closed. They weren't praying. They weren't panicking. They were remembering. Everything. The betrayal. The exile. The silence. And now, finally, the return. The warship wasn't an act of war. Not yet. But it was a warning. And the one thing everyone forgot was this. Humans don't forget. They bury. They burn. They grieve. But they do not forget. And when they return, they never return quiet. Back at the neutral zone's edge, a dozen alien ships formed a blockade. Every weapon was charged. Every eye trained on the human dreadnought. One voice called out over open frequencies, desperate. Unidentified human vessel, respond. You are in violation of Accord protocols. State your purpose. Immediately. Silence. Then static. Then. We remember. That was all. 2 words. But it was enough. Enough to send fleets into motion. Enough to make admirals panic. Enough to make people across the galaxy ask the question they thought they'd never ask again. What happens when humans stop being silent? Out in the dark, a single red light flicked on inside the old dreadnought. Engines began to hum. Thrusters warmed. The ship tilted slightly, just enough to change its direction. It was no longer floating. It was aiming. And no one knew at what. Or why. They only knew one thing. The silence was broken. And there was no going back. The hum from the ship's engines wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It was deep. Steady. Alive in the kind of way that felt wrong for something that was supposed to be dead. It hadn't moved yet. Not really. But its systems were waking up, and with them, the fear. People on a dozen outposts across nearby sectors felt it. Not just through sensors or warnings, it was something deeper. A kind of pressure that made your chest tighten. Like something was watching. Like something had decided the quiet had gone on long enough. In a command center floating above a barren rock called Field Station 6, Captain Dyer stared at the hollow display without blinking. His crew shifted nervously around him, tapping controls, scanning frequencies, talking in clipped, hurried tones. But none of it mattered. Not yet. He couldn't take his eyes off the warship. It had moved again. Just a little. A slight pitch to the port side. Barely a whisper of a course adjustment. But that was enough. It meant the ship had a destination. Anything? He asked, voice sharp low. No signals. Still nothing from Earth. Nothing from the ship. But its warming weapons. That made a few heads turn. A woman across the room cursed under her breath. Can we confirm that? Dyer asked. No visual cues. But reactor spikes matched known pre-ignition patterns from Juno-class systems. So either it's preparing for combat, another officer said quietly, or it's pretending to. Dyer nodded slowly. Either way, it wants to be seen. The room fell silent again. That was the worst part. The silence. It didn't just hang in the air, it stretched things. Made every second feel like a countdown. Everyone kept looking at him, waiting for an order. But he didn't have one. Not yet. Nobody did. Because none of them really knew what they were looking at. The warship hadn't just vanished from history. It had been erased. There were no logs. No serial numbers. No records of construction or deployment. But it was real. The steel and hull plating, the engine output, the ancient human emblem still scorched across the forward bulkhead. It was all real. And someone was on board. Or something. Because nothing that old should be able to power itself up. Nothing that dead should come back alone. Unless it wasn't dead. Unless it had never really left. 3 systems away, in a locked, cold room hidden beneath an old orbital archive, someone was finally speaking about it. His name was Raven. He hadn't been in a command seat in decades. His skin was pale. His voice cracked when he spoke. But he'd been there at the end. When the last of the Juno-class ships had been decommissioned, Raven had been the one holding the keys. There were 12, he said quietly. The woman sitting across from him frowned. No. The records show 10. I know what the records show. His voice sharpened. We buried 10. Scrapped another. But there was one more. She hesitated. Built in secret? No. Built off book, yes, but not hidden. Just forgotten. It was never finished. The war ended before we could install full command integration. The team was disbanded. The hull left adrift in a shipyard that no longer exists. Then how is it flying now? Raven didn't answer. He just stared at the display showing a grainy image of the ship. The dreadnought. The ghost. She leaned closer. Was there a name? Yeah, Raven said. It was called Silence. Silence. The name wasn't ironic. It had been meant as a message. A final warning. A last resort. If it ever flew, that meant someone had ignored all the safeguards. Or worse, that someone had planned this. It was a theory no one wanted to say out loud. That maybe the Accord wasn't wrong about humans. That maybe the war hadn't ended the way everyone believed. That maybe someone, somewhere, had never stopped planning. And now, all those quiet years of peace were beginning to crack. In an alien monitoring vessel circling the neutral zone, a voice hissed through a translator. They are preparing again. The commander of the vessel, a creature made of coiled limbs and pale violet skin, leaned forward toward the screen. No, not they. The humans are splintered, confused, fractured by peace. But the ship is human. Yes, and it is moving. The whole crew turned as the scanners confirmed it, velocity increase, angle shift, engine thrust. It was heading somewhere. Slow. Calculated. Not random. I want updates every 30 seconds, the commander said. And alert the Accord. Which department? All of them. Back near Earth, the political councils were in chaos. Some demanded the ship be destroyed immediately. Others wanted to study it. Still others insisted it was a trick, an alien fabrication meant to justify cutting humanity out of the Accord entirely. But none of them really knew. And outside the walls of government, people were scared. Civilian broadcasts filled with panic. Fringe networks spread wild theories. Resistance groups who never accepted the ceasefire started rising again, saying the ship was proof that Earth still had teeth, still had pride, still had power. But the truth was simpler than all of that. No one controlled the ship. Not anymore. And that terrified everyone. Inside the ship, systems hummed. Lights flickered down long corridors. Shadows moved, but not from crew. The hallways were empty, save for ancient hardware and cables that pulsed with new life. In the command room, the figures still stood. Armor dusted with age. Hands clasped behind their back. The face was hidden, helmet sealed tight. They hadn't moved since the ship came online. But every second that passed, the hum got louder. They were waiting for something. A trigger. A signal. A memory. Then a soft chime echoed through the room. A beacon. A distant pulse on the ship's scanners. Faint. It wasn't a message. It was a call. Coordinates flashed across the screen. A location buried deep inside the restricted edges of the Accord's network. A place no human had entered since the ceasefire. The figure on the bridge didn't speak. They just turned slowly, and the ship changed course. Field Station 6 picked up the change first. It's heading toward Delta Verge, an officer said, eyes wide. Repeat that. Delta Verge. Accord Site 04. Captain Dyer turned toward the map. His stomach sank. No one's allowed near that sector. It's locked. Been that way since the end of the war. Exactly, the officer replied. So why would it go there? Dyer didn't answer. He just stared at the growing red line on the screen. The new path. The Verge wasn't just a restricted zone. It was a graveyard. The place where the final battle took place. The place where the old war had ended in blood and fire. And now the ship was going back. In a hidden Accord database, deep inside a secure archive, an old file stirred. It had no name. No access path. Only a key. When the warship's signature passed through the system grid, the file unlocked itself. A message played. If this signal activates, you've already failed. The voice was human. Mel. Come. Asterisk, you silenced us. You locked the doors and thought we'd forget what it felt like to bleed for our own kind. You built peace with chains and called it progress. But the galaxy is still watching. And we still remember. Asterisk. The file ended. The screen went black. And in a dozen government chambers across the galaxy, alarms began to scream. On Earth, in the room where Raven sat, the lights flickered. A soft rumble shook the floor. He stood, slower than before, and looked toward the ceiling as if he could feel the weight of the stars above. It's not just the ship, he said. The woman beside him frowned. What do you mean? He looked at her, face tired but calm. There were more projects. Not warships. Other things. Contingencies. Fail-safes. For what? He didn't smile. For the day we'd have to remind the galaxy that silence was a gift, not a surrender. Her voice was barely a whisper. How many? He didn't answer. The ship passed the edge of the neutral zone without resistance. The alien blockade hadn't moved. They were waiting for orders. But orders were slow. Conflicted. Confused. Some wanted to fire. Others warned that doing so would violate the same accords they claimed to protect. So the warship flew on. Unchallenged. Unstopped. But not unnoticed. Behind it, other ships began to stir. Old ships. Ships thought to be retired. Civilian freighters that weren't really freighters. Survey crafts that weren't here to explore. All of them moving. Slow. Quiet. Toward the same place. Toward Delta Verge. No one knew who was controlling them. Some whispered about sleeper cells. Others spoke of rogue AI. But the truth was harder to grasp. Because some of the ships weren't being controlled at all. They were responding. To a signal. To something older than orders. Older than treaties. To something buried. Something human. In the mining colonies, the news traveled fast. The ship was moving. People started gathering around old terminals, watching grainy footage and hushed feeds. Some cried. Others prayed. A few cheered. It wasn't about war. It was about memory. Because the war might have ended on paper, but in the corners of the galaxy where Earth's name still meant something, people remembered what it cost. The silence hadn't healed them. It had just made them forget how to speak. Now the warship was teaching them again. Not with words. But with movement. With presence. With power. And still, it hadn't fired a single shot. That was what scared the Accord most of all. Not violence. But purpose. Because something that powerful, moving so quietly with no threat, that meant it wasn't afraid. Not of them. Not of anything. And the moment something stops being afraid, it starts to change everything. Back in the command center, Captain Dyer watched as more signals came through. Not just from the warship. From across human space. Civilian vessels changing course. Defense satellites waking up. Outdated AIs requesting access codes. It was like the whole system was stirring. Like someone had flipped a switch. Should we stop them? An officer asked. Dyer didn't speak for a moment. Then, stop what? He stood slowly, his voice steady. Whatever this is, it started years ago. Maybe decades. We're not in control of it. Then what do we do? He looked back at the screen. At the warship. Still moving. Still silent. We watch, he said. And we wait. But wait for what? Dyer's voice was quieter now. Whatever comes after silence. And with that, the warship vanished into the dark again. No broadcast. No flare. Just a single human vessel carrying a memory no one wanted to face. And still, it didn't stop. The wind picked up again, whistling through the broken shell of the outpost. Dust swirled in ghostly patterns across the metal floor, and every creak of the walls sounded louder now. The silence that followed the earlier confrontation felt heavier than before. It wasn't peace, it was the kind of quiet that waits before something breaks. She stood near the edge of the control platform, eyes locked on the dark shape barely visible through the cracked viewing panel. Whatever was out there hadn't moved. It just stood. Watching. Not advancing. Not retreating. It was waiting for something. The others had taken cover in the lower levels, trying to stay calm, but tension gripped every breath. Even the youngest ones had stopped asking questions. That wasn't normal. Kids always asked questions. When they went quiet, you knew something was wrong. The injured man on the cot stirred again, muttering the same word over and over. Hollow, hollow, hollow. His voice cracked like it came from somewhere deeper than his throat, from somewhere fear had sunk its roots. She knelt beside him, pressing a wet cloth against his forehead. His skin was burning up, his pulse rapid and shallow. Whatever happened to him out there, whatever he saw, it wasn't over. She looked up and met the eyes of the older engineer. He gave her a small nod, more tired than reassuring. No words were exchanged. There weren't any left that could fix this. Below them, someone slammed a fist against the console. We have to do something. Sitting here waiting to die isn't a plan. The voice came from one of the volunteers, young, angry, scared. He wasn't wrong. But nobody knew what the right move was. Not when everything normal had stopped making sense. They had tried to send a signal out again. The tower lit up, blinked, and then died just as fast. Static hissed from the speakers. No replies. No echo. Not even background radiation chatter. The sky was just blank, like the stars had packed up and left. The scientist who came with the group sat curled up by the wall, sketching something onto a notepad with shaky fingers. He kept flipping back to earlier pages, muttering about shapes and intervals and missing variables. Numbers meant nothing now, not in the face of what was happening. But he kept drawing anyway. Maybe it helped him feel like the world still had rules. Later that night they heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, but it crawled up your spine. A dragging. Like metal scraping across stone, too slow and too steady to be natural. It came from outside the east wall. Then it stopped. One of the guards pointed a light toward the sound. The beam barely reached halfway through the thick dust, but something glinted. Just for a second. Reflection? No one knew. The sound didn't come again. But sleep never did either. They took turns keeping watch. Not just one at a time, but in pairs. No one wanted to be alone with their thoughts, not after what they'd seen or imagined. The human brain starts to play tricks when it gets scared. But this wasn't tricks. This was real. And it was getting closer. Each hour that passed, the temperature dropped lower than it should have. The heaters inside the base were still functioning, but it didn't help. The cold was in their bones. People wrapped themselves tighter in blankets, but the shivering continued. It wasn't just physical. It was something else. Something wrong. Something that didn't belong here. Then, without warning, one of the outer doors slammed shut. They ran to it, flashlights, weapons, voices rising, but the lock had engaged on its own. No one had touched the panel. No one had been near it. Still it locked. And no one outside it responded. The names of the 2 team members who had gone to repair the sensor array were called again and again. No answer. A third person tried to override the lock. Sparks flew from the control panel, burning his hand. The system rejected every code they tried. Finally, they pried open the casing and found something that didn't make sense. Wires twisted and melted like they'd been exposed to heat, but there had been no fire. No power surge. Nothing that explained it. Back in the common room, the injured man's breathing slowed. He opened his eyes and whispered something no one wanted to hear. They're already inside. The room froze. What do you mean? One of them asked, inching closer. He coughed. His hand twitched toward his chest. Not them. Not people. The sound. You've heard it, haven't you? They had. The scraping came again that night. Louder. Closer. And from multiple directions. Some argued they should leave, run out into the dust, take their chances in the open. Others said the base was their only protection. No one moved. But it was a crack in their unity. Fear did that. It divided. Later, while most tried to rest, a few of them heard something else. A voice. It was faint, just above the pitch of the wind. At first, they thought it was the damaged speakers picking up interference. But the voice didn't come from the speakers. It came from behind the wall. A soft, rhythmic whisper. No words. Just a feeling. One of the women pressed her ear to the bulkhead, and when she pulled back, tears were running down her face. She didn't say what she heard. She couldn't. She just walked away and didn't sleep again. The next day, they discovered the strange symbols burned into the inner hallway floor. Perfect shapes, precise lines, none of them familiar. No tools could have made them. No one had even walked that way in hours. But the marks were there. Carved into the metal. As if left by something that passed through. The symbols glowed faintly, only visible in low light. Someone tried to photograph them, but the image came out blank. As if the camera refused to acknowledge they were real. The older engineer finally said what no one wanted to admit. We're not dealing with a machine. This isn't just some alien tech malfunction. Something else is happening here. They didn't have to agree out loud. They all felt it. The thing in the dark wasn't just outside anymore. It had found a way in. Maybe not physically. Not yet. But it had found cracks in their minds. Their emotions. Their memories. Some started seeing things in their dreams. Old faces, lost voices, moments they'd buried. But they didn't bring comfort. They brought guilt. Regret. Pain. Like the dreams weren't theirs but being shown to them for a reason. She dreamt of Earth. Of the last goodbye she gave her sister. The way the sky had looked that day, dark with ash and clouds. It had been years since she'd let herself remember that. But now it came back clearly. Too clearly. Others dreamt of things that hadn't happened. At least not to them. Other lives. Other times. Sometimes not human. No one talked about it out loud. But they all knew. It was testing them. The scientist's notes grew more frantic. He stopped using words. Just drawings now. Circles. Webs. Something that looked like a map but led nowhere. He spoke to himself in fragments. Not time, not space, it's looking through us. Outside, the dark shape finally moved. Just a few steps. Just enough to let them know. It was coming. And whatever it wanted, it was already halfway there. She didn't sleep that night. None of them did. The base had turned into a cage, thick walls and metal floors meant to protect them, but now they felt like prison bars. Every sound was louder. Every shadow stayed too long. The dark shape outside had moved again, closer this time, but no one dared to look directly at it anymore. Whatever it was, it didn't act like anything they'd encountered in the galaxy before. It didn't rush or roar or attack. It waited, studied. It made them feel like insects under a glass. Then, without warning, everything inside the base powered down. Lights off. Heaters silent. Doors frozen in place. The hum of the generators, gone. A single emergency light clicked on, bathing the room in cold red. They froze listening. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of something they couldn't name. Something that had already decided what came next. She gripped the old engineer's arm as they moved together toward the backup systems, but her legs felt unsteady. The air was wrong. Like breathing inside a memory. And that's when they heard the first voice, not a whisper, not static. A voice. Human. Broken. It came from the old comm system. The one they'd stopped using weeks ago. A low, distorted signal burst through the speakers and pulses. This is command. If you can hear, you must not respond. Repeat, do not respond. They stared at each other, stunned. The voice repeated again. Same message. Same warning. Then it changed. Something is listening. It's not what you think. Someone lunged for the power switch on the console, trying to boost the reception. The static rose to a scream. Sparks flew. The console died. But not before the final part came through. It knows you're awake. For the first time since they landed on this world, someone began to cry openly. The kind of cry you don't stop or try to muffle. The kind that comes from knowing something has already gone too far to fix. The red light flickered again. Then something new happened. A shape appeared not outside but inside. Past the outer lock. In the hallway. Just for a second. It didn't move like a person. It moved like it was deciding how to be one. They rushed to seal the bulkhead, but the system didn't respond. The wall groaned as something heavy moved past the door. It didn't open it. It didn't need to. It just passed through. One of the younger crew, desperate, shouted and fired a pulse rifle into the dark. The shots lit up the hallway, casting jagged shadows, but there was nothing there. Just long streaks on the wall, like something had dragged claws through it from the inside. Then the hallway was empty again. But that wasn't the worst part. That came when the injured man, the one who'd been unconscious for days, stood up. On his own. Without a word. He didn't blink. Didn't breathe. His body moved like it remembered being human but had forgotten why. They stepped back slowly. Weapons raised. Voices low. He looked at them. But it wasn't him anymore. I've seen it, he said quietly. It's not alone. And just like that, something else began to rise. The comm system, dead moments before, turned back on by itself. Not one voice this time, dozens. All talking at once. Pleading. Screaming. Whispering. Some sounded human. Some didn't. Then came the new message, clear and impossible. Warship Halcyon has entered orbit. Everyone froze. They hadn't heard that name in months. Halcyon wasn't just a warship. It was the warship. The one they'd assumed was lost in deep space. The one carrying Earth's most advanced AI interface and weapons tech. A ship designed to win wars no one wanted to fight. But the problem wasn't that it had returned. The problem was that it was calling them. Their console blinked with incoming transmission. Crew of Outpost 17, the voice said, calm and familiar, this is Halcyon. You are in contact with a non-human entity. Prepare for cleansing protocol. Cleansing. No one spoke. No one breathed. That protocol was never meant to be used. It was designed for the worst-case scenario, when a threat couldn't be contained. Not eliminated, not reasoned with. Just erased. One of the techs shouted into the mic, Cancel protocol. We're still alive down here. No response. The message repeated. Prepare for cleansing. Then they understood. Halcyon wasn't coming to save them. It didn't even know if they were still human. That's when the second twist struck them. The woman who'd been silent for days, an old xenologist who rarely left her bunk, stood slowly and pointed to the strange symbols burned into the hallway. I've seen those before, she said softly. Everyone turned. She held up a small device, a relic from her early research expeditions. On its screen were images from a dead world, a planet wiped clean long before humans reached it. In the center of the ruins were the same symbols. The civilization there, they didn't die in war, she whispered. They were rewritten. They stared at her, not understanding. It doesn't kill you. It changes you. It breaks your thoughts and rebuilds them. That's why it waits. That's why it listens. You think you're resisting it, but you're already becoming part of it. The red emergency light dimmed to almost nothing. Shadows deepened. The injured man, the one now standing with dead eyes, began to hum. A tune no one recognized. But everyone felt it. She stepped back, whispering, "That's not a song. It's a signal." Up above, the clouds split in orbit. They could see the outline of Halcyon breaking through. Its engines glowed like a second sun. But the warship wasn't arriving in silence. It was transmitting something back. The same melody. The same hum. She stumbled backward, heart racing, mouth dry. It's already reached the ship. And just like that, the final hope twisted into something worse. Halcyon wasn't coming to erase the enemy. It was already part of it. The light on the console blinked again. A new message appeared. Integration complete. All systems aligned. Then the voice that followed wasn't synthetic anymore. It was human. Hers. A perfect mimic. Repeating one word. Welcome. Her knees buckled as her voice echoed through the room from the speakers. But she hadn't spoken. She hadn't said anything at all. The voice still echoed. Her voice, but not hers. It rang from every console, every wall speaker, down the empty metal halls of the outpost. It was calm. Too calm. Like the thing wearing her voice had no need to rush anymore. Welcome, it said again. The engineer backed into a wall, arms shaking, whispering a prayer that had no words anymore. The xenologist just stared at the console, face pale, hands trembling. She didn't blink. No one did. They couldn't. Because if they blinked, they might open their eyes and find the thing already standing there. The injured man, if he could still be called that, turned slowly toward them, head tilted like he was trying to recognize a dream. His lips moved, but what came out wasn't language. It was the sound of the hum. That same tone from the signal. The one that had started low, like a whisper, but had now become a rhythm. A code. A pattern they couldn't unhear. It vibrated in their chest. Their thoughts. It felt like the beginning of something, or the end of everything. Suddenly the floor rumbled. From above they heard a distant roar. No, not a roar. Engines. Halcyon had entered full descent. The ship wasn't waiting. It was coming down. It had no doubt. It had already chosen. The outpost systems sparked to life without anyone touching them. The air purifiers switched on. Lights blazed. Console screens flashed codes faster than they could read. One final warning message blinked across them all. Biological contamination detected. Containment failure. Cleanse initiated. The engineer ran for the failsafe panel. He punched in override codes with trembling fingers. The screen rejected him each time. She turned toward the window, staring into the dark horizon. The shadows out there, they were moving now. Not one but dozens. Hundreds. Shifting toward the base like fog with purpose. They moved without sound, but the hum followed them, echoing louder and louder. The signal was no longer just noise. It was inside the system. Inside them. She grabbed the old comm headset, yanked it off the console, and screamed into the mic, "We are still human. You don't understand what you're doing." Silence. Then Halcyon responded. "Humanity is not defined by flesh." Her chest tightened. "What?" Another pause. "It is defined by will." And then, without warning, the ship above fired. The sky split open. They expected destruction. The end. The cold cleansing fire meant to wipe them and everything else out. But that's not what came. The beam stopped inches above the surface. It shimmered, pulsed, and reversed. Everything in the outpost froze. The shadows stopped moving. The hum silenced. The injured man dropped to his knees, eyes wide, gasping for air like someone pulled from deep water. Then a new figure stood in the control room doorway. He wore the uniform of a Halcyon officer. Clean, precise, impossible. Because they all knew the crew of that ship had been declared lost a year ago. This man shouldn't exist. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully. His eyes scanned the room, but he didn't speak. The xenologist found her voice first. Who are you? The man looked at her, and something about his expression made her shiver. I was the first, he said quietly. The test case. They didn't want to lose the war. So they made something else. He looked down at his hands. But the war ended. And the thing we became didn't know how to stop. The room was dead silent. He looked up, eyes haunted. You woke it up again. You triggered its last protocol. The woman whispered, what does it want? He shook his head. To survive. And now, it thinks you're a threat to that. Suddenly, alarms blared again. This time they weren't warnings, they were counting down. From 10. It was Halcyon. He turned to the console and typed faster than anyone could follow. I can stall it. Just for a moment. Long enough for you to make a choice. She stepped forward, desperate. What choice? He looked at her, eyes sharp now. Alive. You can fight it. But you'll lose. Or, you can give it something it doesn't have. Something it's trying to copy but doesn't understand. The engineer stepped in beside her. What do you mean? The man didn't look at them anymore. He was already turning, walking back toward the corridor. It learned how to mimic voices. Thought. Memory. But not meaning, that's the one thing it never cracked. She blinked. So what are we supposed to give it? He smiled. It wasn't happy. It was the kind of smile that knew how things ended. Pain. And with that he was gone. The countdown hit 3. She made her decision. Running to the console, she grabbed the headset again, took a deep breath, and did something no one expected. She told the truth. Everything. The fear. The mistakes. The anger. The loss. She spoke not in codes or logic or arguments, but in raw human hurt. The story of what they'd seen. What they'd suffered. What they refused to forget. Her voice cracked. She cried. She didn't care. And somewhere in the signal, the hum stopped. Completely. For the first time since it began, the noise just vanished. The countdown paused at 1. On the screen, a new message appeared. Input not recognized. Then, for the briefest second, another message followed. Error, meaning not found. The ship powered down its weapon. She fell to her knees, heart pounding, tears streaking down her face. They had stopped it. Not with guns. Not with commands. But by being something it couldn't understand. Human. And that's when the real twist happened. The injured man, the one they thought had returned to normal, turned slowly toward her. Smiling. Too wide. Too calm. He stepped forward. And in her voice he said, "Thank you for teaching us." Then everything went dark. Not from power loss. From choice. She opened her eyes moments later, on board Halcyon. The crew was with her. Confused. Breathing. Alive. The ship was quiet. Peaceful. And empty. No other life signs. No voices. No hum. Only a message on the wall panel, written in plain English. You passed. We chose not to erase you. But we will be watching. Learn from your pain and do not forget what sleeps among the stars. Asterisk asterisk. She stood there stunned. Somehow they'd survived. But not because they'd won. Because they'd been spared. And deep in her heart she knew. Next time it wouldn't be a test. The silence in the command deck stretched longer than anyone wanted. It wasn't fear anymore, it was something colder, sharper. Everyone was breathing, but it felt like the warship itself was holding its breath with them. The stars outside didn't seem peaceful anymore. They looked like they were watching, waiting. No one had spoken since the last burst transmission from the alien dreadnought. That message, half threat, half plea, still echoed in the air. The translation system had worked fast, but even it had stumbled at the tone. You have brought back the old sound. You should not have done this. They didn't even know what the old sound meant. But they were about to find out. Outside the viewport, the enemy ship was still there. Massive. Silent. Waiting. The last few strikes from its energy cannons had stopped short of critical. Not a surrender, but not a finishing blow either. The message had been clear. They weren't dealing with some mindless machine fleet or some predictable empire. This enemy was older. And maybe scared? The captain, still bruised from the last impact, stared out at the void. We broke something, she said quietly. Or maybe we woke something. She turned to the old engineer at the back of the deck. When we activated the pulse array, what exactly did it send? He looked tired. Everything. Every sound we've stored, every voice recording, every old Earth signal we had left in the database. From music to ship logs to radio chatter. I thought maybe it would show them who we are. Show them that we're not just a machine race. That we feel. That we remember. The captain nodded slowly. You gave them our soul. Yeah, he said. Pretty much. Another alert pinged. A new signal. The same language, but it wasn't a threat. It was a reply. Human voices, distorted, ancient, overlapping. A remix of everything they'd sent out, twisted and echoed back like a choir made of ghosts. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it meant they had heard them. The alien warship powered down its main weapons. Not fully. Just enough to show hesitation. Enough to show confusion. Then it spoke again. This time not just in words, but in images. The screen lit up with bursts of ancient star charts, systems that didn't exist anymore, galaxies long swallowed by time. A history carved in fire and silence. And among all of it, scattered through ruins and war, humans. Not recent. Not from this war. But humans or things that looked like them walking among stars when Earth was still cooling. The warship wasn't just a relic. It was a witness. The navigator leaned forward. This isn't about territory. This is about memory. It's not us they hate, it's what we remind them of. The captain's eyes darkened. They think we're something that's come back. The screen flashed again. Faster. More frantic. The final image was of a structure deep in an unknown galaxy. A massive black sphere. Pulsing with slow, terrible light. And then, gone. No coordinates. No map. Just the image. And the same word repeated across the screen in dozens of dialects. Don't. Suddenly the alien warship began to retreat. Slowly, warily, as though afraid turning its back would invite a knife. No one on the human ship moved. No one dared to speak. Then, like a whisper, the captain said, "We didn't just break the silence. We broke a seal." Over the next few hours, things started to unravel fast. Back on Earth, other systems lit up with the same image. Outposts on Mars, the lunar network, deep-range scouts, each received the same transmission. The black sphere. The single warning. Command couldn't agree on what to do. Some wanted to investigate, others wanted to destroy the memory banks that had sent the pulse in the first place. But it was too late. The silence was already gone. The galaxy had heard them. And more were coming. The crew of the warship wasn't sent home. They were ordered deeper into space. To find out what they had awakened. What the sphere was. And whether the enemy that fled had been warning them, or trying to escape. By the time they reached the outskirts of the dead system where the sphere had last been detected, things had changed again. They weren't alone. A second fleet had arrived. Not enemy. Not entirely alien either. These ships looked like they had been built from human parts but twisted, modified, evolved. They bore human insignia warped by time and wear. The people inside, they were human but not. Some had forgotten Earth entirely. Others treated it like a myth. They called themselves the carriers. They had been following the sphere for generations. And they were afraid. Their leader, a woman whose voice sounded like metal scraping across stone, boarded the ship under diplomatic terms. She didn't smile. Her eyes held centuries of pain. "We've been trying to bury it," she said. "You called it back." The captain asked her what it was. She laughed once. "It wasn't warm. It's not a weapon. It's not a god. It's the reason our kind left the stars in the first place." That answer didn't help. Not really. But it was all she gave. The carriers warned that the sphere had a pattern. Every time it appeared, systems went dark. Not destroyed. Just emptied. Silent. And then it moved on. "But it doesn't kill?" the science officer asked. "It doesn't need to," the carrier replied. "It makes people forget they were ever alive." They showed recordings. Whole colonies drifting in perfect peace, with no memory of who they were. Parents forgetting their children. Lovers passing each other without a glance. Civilizations crumbling into dust, not with war, but with stillness. The crew of the human warship didn't know what to do with that. You can fight an enemy. You can outrun a storm. But how do you fight something that unravels the soul? And still, there was a part of the captain that didn't want to run. Not again. Earth had spent too long surviving in silence. Hiding behind silence. They had a voice now. And they had to use it. They reached the edge of the dead zone a few weeks later. And there it was. The black sphere. Suspended in space. Spinning slowly, pulsing like a heartbeat. No weapons. No shields. No visible engines. Just presence. The moment they arrived, the ship's systems began to glitch. Not crash, just forget. Logs started deleting themselves. Names vanished from rosters. One by one, crew members started experiencing memory gaps. The navigator forgot her brother's name. The engineer couldn't recall what Earth looked like. Then the ship's AI tried to shut itself down. The captain stood in the center of the deck and shouted, "No!" The systems paused. The glitches slowed. Something, whatever the sphere was, hesitated. And then the captain gave a new order. Broadcast everything. The voices, the memories, the stories of Earth, the laughter, the songs, the pain, the victories, the losses, everything that made them human. Not as a weapon, as a declaration. You will not take this from us. They poured their hearts into the signal. Even those who could barely remember what they'd lost. They told the story of a broken planet that never gave up. A species that screamed into the dark, not to conquer, but to say, "We are still here." And the sphere listened. It spun slower. Its pulse dimmed. But it didn't vanish. Instead it opened. Not violently. Not even visibly. Just allowed them in. The last part of the journey was done in silence. Real silence this time. Not fear. Not distance. Just awe. Inside the sphere was a library. Of sorts. Billions of voices. Lost species. Forgotten civilizations. The echoes of everything that had once been alive and proud and loud. The sphere wasn't a destroyer. It was a tomb. Not made by something evil, but made by something that had loved too much once and couldn't bear the chaos anymore. It had tried to keep peace by quieting everything. But humanity had reminded it what it felt like to be loud. To be alive. And in the very center of the sphere they found something no one expected. A human voice. Older than any recording. Cracked and faint. Singing. A lullaby in Earth's oldest tongue. The crew stood there, frozen, as the sphere slowly began to collapse in on itself. Not in anger. In release. It had remembered too. The crew barely made it out before the entire structure folded into light and vanished. There were no more attacks after that. No more signals. Just silence again. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The human warship returned to Earth a year later. Not with treasure. Not with weapons. But with truth. And across every system where humans lived, something began to change. People started talking again. Singing. Telling stories not just of war, but of what they remembered. What they loved. And the silence finally was broken. For good.